In OKR, it's very different. So the why is front and center. Explaining the context is crucial. So leaders play that crucial role of setting the context, explaining the why, setting the strategy. Together with the team to discuss, say, what's the outcome we want to achieve? We need to work together to achieve it. And then the teams have autonomy on the how. NASA decided it's a 3-stage propeller rocket, right? It's not the executive somewhere that say, hey, we need a rocket. And Netflix has one of the leadership principles is lead with context, not control. That's exactly the idea. So a very different role for leaders, and a very important one, which is lead with context, not control. And the challenge is that in order to be able to adopt this new model, we need to respectfully unlearn the Agile manifesto. Not the whole thing, right? I'm not saying stop using Agile. We need to respectfully unlearn parts of the Agile. Protesters started already, people are already protesting. Bit of representation, yeah, that was great. Self-organizing groups. So the idea is the Agile Manifesto is a historical document, right? 20 years old, and it no longer represents how high performance teams work today. I'm not saying stop use Agile. I'm not saying stop use Scrum or Kanban. I'm just saying we need to learn some parts of our historical job. And the manifesto talks a lot about value, right? But value is vague. That is a fuzzy concept, ambiguous. How do we measure it? So there's an evolution of the tools, right? So years ago, we had waterfall was the best tool that we had at the time, and they measure progress using the schedule, right? And the underlying assumption was, if we follow the plan, we'll deliver value. Right? That was the underlying assumption. Then came Agile, which was a better tool. And they say, working software is the primary measure of progress. That's the 7th principle of the manifesto. And the underlying assumption is, if we follow the stakeholders, we will deliver value. But is this assumption correct? That's the big question. And this is a great quote from Ron Jeffries. He tweeted about us a few years ago. Choosing the right things to do to make is, of course, massively important. Agile is intentionally about the making, not the choosing. So repeat that, coming from one of the signatories of the manifesto. Agile is intentionally about the making, not the choosing. Okay. So traditional Agile intentionally follows the waiter model, right? That's what Ron Jeffries said, right? So the idea is, hey, Agile was not trying to decide what should we build. We're trying to solve the problem, how do we build things? The problem of choosing what to build was not the problem we're trying to solve with Agile. That's what Ron Jeffries is trying to do, right? And Mary Poppenjack wrote that perhaps the biggest shortcoming of Agile is the way in which teams decide what to do. For the longest time, answering these questions has not been considered responsibility of the team. So what do you think about that?
Well, I don't teach that. I mean, I teach that through face-to-face and in-person collaboration with the customer, the product emerges. Because in a complex environment, you really don't know.
Yep.
So you basically create fertile ground for innovation.
Yeah, but
so
what do you think
it's
about
not the waiter model at all. It's a collaborative model, and that's how.
Yeah, but what do you think about this? From the guy, one of the guys was there and actually did that.
I love Ron, and I've never disagreed with him. So this might be a first.
Okay.
Yeah. I think when I think back and going back to like around the time when the manifesto was created, I mean, even then when teams were sitting directly with the customer, it was still the customer that made the decision as well, right? I mean,
Yeah, but
the org,
it's still collaborate.
it was the collaborative, yes, for sure. And in a way, you could argue that the developers or the team would be facilitating the customer, but it was still the customer that was still the primary person in
Yeah, they're writing the checks. So,
Right? So I like to say that value is like a joke. You don't get to say if your joke is funny. The audience tells you if your joke is funny. The same way, you don't get to say if your software is valuable. The audience gets to say if your software is valuable. If people are not laughing, you change the joke. If people are not using your software, you change the software. Right? So that's the same idea. And the way Agile is traditionally taught tends to follow the Hippo model, right? And this cartoon from the book How Google Works is a great example of the Hippo model, where decisions are made by the highest paid person opinion, right? So in this cartoon, we have the team presenting lots of evidence for option A, and the boss says, hey, I want option B. I'm the boss, I make more money. I'll decide, okay? So we have to be careful when following the Hippo model, because one of the things that helps people understand the shift we need to make when using Agile as traditionally taught is that getting the stakeholders' opinion during, say, a review is not a reliable indicator of success, because nobody can predict what will work or not, right? And the model you describe where the teams are working with the customer comes from IT, where it's internal IT. What if the customer is outside the company? We're not working together in the same room with them. It's a million people using our, say, banking app. So we have better techniques now. Okay? Sometimes when we discuss this, people say, oh, but they did a business case. And I love this quote from Scott Cook, the founder of Intuit. It says, for every one of our failures, we had spreadsheets that looked awesome. So we keep trying to predict the future and instead of actually discovering it, right, and testing different ideas and finding out what works. So Excel projections are also often not reliable because of success. So it's very common for companies to say they're agile, but often what they're doing is they're just building something from many, many years to launch it, but they never ask, there's no measurement at the project level. They never measure if that project actually delivered the promised benefit. They just launch the thing, right? And they never measure it. But what happens when you actually measure outcomes? Well, companies that measure outcomes, they usually discover this exactly the same thing. Most ideas fail. This here in this slide, we have some data from Microsoft, which in a rough approximation, 1/3 of ideas in experiments generate positive results. 1/3 generates no results. The remaining third, there's negative results, meaning you launch something, metrics. Lots of evidence from many different companies. For example, at Google, only about 10 to 20% of experiments generate positive results. So in the beginning, when I said 50% of the projects don't work, it's way better, can be way better than, way worse than that, because it can be like 80% of things don't work, 90% of things don't work. And even high-level strategies also fail, right? Gibson Beetle, former VP of product from Netflix, saying half of Netflix high-level strategies fail. Half. So we can build on top of Agile. It's not about learning everything about Agile, but having product teams where outcomes are the real measure of progress. And then the line assumption is that if we follow the evidence, we will deliver value, right? So we have a better language than value now, okay? Which is the language of outcomes. So outcomes, they bring a very precise definition of term of art. An outcome is the measurable beneficial effect you want to create for your customers, your company, or your employees. It's a term of art, meaning precise definition within outcome planning. And so we stick to this definition of what an outcome is. So the idea is that this changed the conversation to what is value, to hey, what's the benefit we want to create, how we measure it. So it's actionable and more precise. The idea of delivering value was useful for decades. We have better tools now than talking about something as fuzzy and ambiguous as value. And we need to contrast an outcome with an activity, which activities are all that you do, projects, programs, initiatives, tasks, actions, epics, user stories, right? The big umbrella term for everything you do. So you contrast what you do with, hey, what is the difference we're trying to make? What are the outcomes we're trying to achieve? What are those measurable beneficial effects we want to create? What is the difference we're trying to make? Stephen Covey had probably the most concise definition of focusing on outcomes, which is begin with the end in mind. The idea is you start by thinking about, hey, what do we want to achieve? And then after you know what you're going to achieve, you work backwards. What do we need to do to get there? You never lose sight of what you want to achieve. Amazon has a very similar concept, which is we start with the customer and work backwards. At Amazon, working backwards is the first leadership principle. So they start with customer need and work backwards from it. So you never lose sight of what you want to try to achieve. You never lose sight of the difference you're trying to make. So how can we apply this in practice? Well, basically by using OKR, right? So here's an example of an OKR, right? You have an objective like create an awesome customer experience. This is what we want to achieve. This is the problem or opportunity we're trying to tackle. And then we have a set of key results, right? To basically measure if you are solving the problem, if you are moving in the right direction. For this example, we will know if we create an awesome customer experience by measuring, we increase the repurchase rate, so people buy again from us. We're going to improve the customer satisfaction score. It can be an NPS, can be whatever metric you want. And we're going to do that while maintaining the customer acquisition cost. So we have a set of tricky results that measure, we are moving towards that objective. So the big difference is about activities versus key results, right? What do you do versus the outcomes? And we have to learn how to manage separate buckets. So in the first bucket, you're going to put the key results, the outcomes you want to achieve. And in the second bucket, you're going to put your activities, the things you could do to achieve your activity. It's a very simple example. Activities could be develop a feature, redesign the customer journey, deliver a project. But if you redesign the customer journey and that doesn't move the needle, you do it something else, right? So you can also think of the activities bucket as your backlog. Think of it as a backlog of ideas. We're not committed to any item. We're usually not committed to anything that is in the bucket, right? But we test in different things. If they're working, we keep doing them. If they're not working, we change it, we do something else. Okay. And there's a great tip from Marissa Meyer. It's not a key result unless it has a number. The simplest way to spot either an activity or a badly written key result. Let me pause there and questions. Questions about activities versus key results versus OKRs. Any questions?
There was a question on the chat about making a distinction between customers and stakeholders. You know, how do you see like the customer? Let me read it. The reason I asked is the customer opinion matters, especially of that of a customer board. Any particular that?
What is a customer board? It's about asking people what they want in the product. Yeah, we have way better techniques than that right now, because we have lots of evidence to show that people don't know what they want. So customers are terrible at creating solutions. So you need to focus on the problems they're trying to solve, and then you create a solution. So the idea is you understand their problems. Customers are really good at telling you the problems they have. They're really bad at telling you what's going to solve their problem. Okay? So getting a feature list from the customer is one of the things we need to unlearn. Is a technique that people don't. High performance teams have better techniques now. Make sense? So it's not a key result unless it has a number. But don't let it fool you. All key results have numbers, but not everything that has a key result. Not everything that has a number is a key result. So if you look at those here, what do you think about those two? Are those key results as we describe them? Matter of fact, why not? Ken is saying no. Why can't? Ken is why are you saying that those are not key results?
I don't see a result. I see activities.
Yep.
I don't see value.
Yeah. So the thing is, sometimes when you tell people, yeah, it needs to be measurable, they measure activities, how many activities we ship, right? So especially when you have that from X to Y format, people tend to, yeah, there's from X to Y, right? The second one is of course a very obvious example, which is not a key result, right? But people tend to fall for everything that has a from X to Y, right? So the big challenge is the concept of outputs. Companies often measure output. The dictionary definition of output is the amount of something produced. How many things you ship, that's the dictionary definition of output, right? Which is that the proper definition of what clean means. Even if it has a DOD, you can have whatever DOD you want. The clean is whatever. Yeah, clean my desk, so what? So, right? So that's not the idea. The idea is what's the outcome? What's the difference we're trying to make, right? So the output, the amount of something produced, that's what usually tricks people, right? So here in this slide, you have several examples of key results and activities or outputs, right? So key results could be reduce customers to require assistance, right, from X% to Y%. An activity could be launch a new UI. Another key result could be increase the number of qualified leads, and activities could be run 5 webinars. It's an output. There's a number, but I'm counting how many things I did, things I ship. So things on the left are examples of key results, things on the right are activities or outputs. Please give example of good KR for the bad examples. Make 5 posts is exactly this. It's on the screen. We had one was about make 5 posts. Why do you want to make 5 posts? It was about connecting to the why you're doing it, right? A very simple technique that we can use. Are you familiar with the 5 whys technique? Everybody here familiar with the 5 whys technique? Keep asking why. Why do you want to make 5 posts? Eventually you get to the outcome. Eventually you get to, oh, we want to generate leads. We want to get talk. We want to. Right? So things on the left are key results. Things on the right are ideas on how to achieve those key results. Make sense? Yeah, so Dave asks, there's a very common mistake, which is measuring what's easy instead of measuring what we should be measuring. So when you think about the outcomes, and again, the outcomes are the measurable beneficial effects you want to create. right? It helps you focus on the customer need instead of just measuring what's easy. Right? Again, if you think about activities versus outputs versus results, activities are what you do, outputs are the amount produced, how many things you ship. And all those things here in the bottom are things that have numbers, not just outputs. Number of story points, hours of training, number of activities, number of projects, number of items delivered. Don't let those fool you. They have numbers in them, but they don't make a difference. Right? This is not the outcome you're trying to achieve. Okay? So what we need to learn, if you go back to the Agile Manifesto, working software is a primary measure of progress. That's something that we need to unlearn from the manifesto, right? Outcomes are the primary measure of progress, right? Shipping more software that nobody uses, that's definitely not the primary measure of progress, right? I love this quote from Peter Drucker. There is surely nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency what should not be done at all. So shipping a gazillion points that nobody uses, that's a great example of being efficient but not effective, right? So velocity in the wrong direction is waste, right? We're shipping lots and lots of so velocity in the wrong direction is waste, right? Again, shipping a gazillion points that nobody uses. Yeah, we just created tons of software that nobody uses, and now we have to maintain this thing, right? And what again, the way that Agile frameworks are traditionally taught, if you look at the title of Jet Sutherland's book, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. That's the manufacturing mentality. That's output Agile. You need to learn output Agile. The goal was never to ship more software, right? Shipping more lines of code, more points, more velocity, right? So that was never the goal. The goal is to make a difference through software, right? Sometimes shipping less software is better, right? So this is, I'm not saying unlearn in Scrum. I'm saying unlearn Scrum the way it's traditionally taught. Okay? And another quote from Ron Jeffries, I like to say that I may have invented story points, and if I did, I'm sorry now. Okay? So for computers still measuring velocity and things like that, this is definitely something that you need to learn. Okay? So what do you think?
Thoughts from the audience? Please remember to unmute yourself before speaking.
Would you say, Felipe, that KRs, the key results, they are hypotheses to reach the objective? And we test the hypothesis that, okay, reaching that amount of number, let's say changing the NPS, for example, we will reach that objective. Would you say this is something close to that?
Because that's how you measure if you're moving towards the objective. That's it. They're not hypotheses. An activity can be an experiment to see if it's, we're going to do this thing as an experiment to see if it moves the needle, right? But and if you go back to the outcome tree when we the beginning, just find it. So in the beginning, if you have this, those things, I mean, each one of those arrows is a hypothesis that you have to prove over time. So you have to prove that increasing the share of Google search traffic gets you more qualified leads, right? So each one of those arrows is a hypothesis that you prove over time.
Hey, Felipe, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm trying to integrate design thinking with OKRs here. And one of the things I observed was focus on the outcomes, which is fair. And I understand that the moment you get into customer journey mapping, etc., it is unavoidable that you do pick a customer for their insight on the desired how.
Yeah.
So how do you how do you avoid that when you're kind of getting into a purely outcomes focused?
I'm not sure I understood the question.
So when I think somewhere earlier in the presentation, I did gather that it is important to focus on the outcomes, but not so much focus on the how. So, for example, if it's more like I don't want to be given a feature list. I would want to be told what the outcome is, and then the team would trust the team to deliver the best outcome, right? So you did make the point. So when I get into a design thinking kind of an exercise, I cannot avoid the fact that we would need to go through a customer journey mapping process, which does involve some element of, what do I do now and how do I do it now?
Okay.
Which is more about how to do it rather than a pure observation about what the problem is.
Yeah. So I'm definitely not a design thinking expert, but it's about design thinking brings prototyping, lots of customer centricity. So it's about what's the customer need. So I think it's totally aligned to what I'm describing here.
Okay. No, I wasn't kind of questioning it. I was trying to see how I can integrate it better into the OKR philosophy.
If you look at the screen, the idea is give people business or customer need to address. So design thinking it focus a lot on focusing on the customer needs. It shouldn't be that hard because the concepts are very similar. And
right.
Also about rapid prototyping. So the same idea of separating activities from OKRs. If you go back to the slide, here you go. So it's exactly the same idea. So you do rapid prototyping, so you test different ideas on the bucket on the right and see which ones actually move the needle on the left. So you do rapid prototyping and learn. And things that don't, you have several ideas in the right bucket. You do rapid prototyping and you discard the ones that those are not working, you just discard them.
Okay.
Ash, is your question related to just that it being more qualitative, and how do you define the qualitative metrics that makes the user happy? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. So ideally, where my biggest disconnect or where I'm trying to synthesize here is really around what I did gather was stakeholder possibly is not very important. And you do need to trust the team to figure out the right solution given the broader outcome, right? Whereas design thinking as a practice does build from outcomes to also on the how.
Yeah, and just to be clear, stakeholders are important, right? If you look at this definition from Marty, serve the customers in ways that meet the needs of the business. So stakeholders that help you with the needs of the business. And
yeah, I do. I understand.
They are very important part of the equation, right? So
yeah, I understand. I was more referring to the slide that you had on the hippo where you did say stakeholders were not important. Maybe stakeholders, by stakeholders you meant the internal stakeholders there.
Yeah, I mean every one of them. So the idea is you need to meet the needs of the business. So they are very important. They're just not very good at telling you which is going to actually work to achieve the outcome. That's the point. Stakeholders are important, but their opinion is not a reliable indicator of success. That's it.
Right, thank you.
Okay. Dave is asking, all the companies you mentioned are doing things that the new, better way are compared to that. I'm not saying putting those companies in a pedestal. They're saying copy everything they do. I'm just using them as examples. We're gonna say every single one of them is a customer privacy violator, but again, I'm not saying. I'm just using them as examples of the ways of working. We can learn from them. I'm not putting them in a pedestal. Those companies do several very bad things. I'm just saying no company is perfect.
Felipe, I have
And again,
Go
And
ahead.
just purely on the question that was on the screen, setting guardrails and constraints is a core part of writing great OKRs. So if you look at in the example, right? So that's a guardrail, the constraint, right? So respecting customer privacy can be a constraint. Yeah, sorry, that's not negotiable. Just like for Kennedy, yeah, after safety was not negotiable, right? We need to get this up and back. So we just say, yeah, customer privacy is not negotiable, for example. I guess for Apple that is, but it fits their business model as well. Okay, so you can add whatever constraints and guardrails you want. The model is there.
Hey, Felipe, when you start developing a solution, you have to have at least one person or one customer that you are working close with. You can satisfy that customer and expand on that by listening to him, listening to other customers, and develop an outcome-based mechanism. But you have to start with an output-based mechanism, because if you don't satisfy that one customer, you won't be able to move forward.
Yeah, but
Is that making sense?
I'm sorry, I don't follow. What does outputs has to do with satisfying one customer?
Well, you are going to have a backlog of something or other that is going to be tied closer to the customer's specific requirements.
Requirements are another thing that we need to learn. Requirements comes from this idea of serving the business. Requirements, they come from exactly this slide here, right? Most of the things are not requirements unless they're legal requirements or contractual requirements. Most things are, yeah, the stakeholder has an idea that they believe is going to move the needle, right? So most of the things in life are not requirements. You can have some legal regulatory requirements. You can have some contractual obligations. Yeah, we have a contract with Coca-Cola. We have to ship this thing. That's a requirement. But the stakeholder asks us to develop this feature. That's not a requirement. That's an idea that comes from a HIPPO. So requirements are also some things that we need to learn. So when things that work on the product team specs, right? And I strongly recommend you to read Marty Kagan's work. I mentioned Marty several times in the presentation. They do what's called product discovery. So you start with customer need, understand the needs of the business, and then you discover what to actually solve the customer need while serving the business, while meeting the needs of the business, right? So the concept of requirements is one of the things we need to learn. Requirements, acceptance criteria. I'm not saying never use them. I'm just saying they have a way smaller role that they have in traditional. So the idea of requirements comes from this idea, right? You just play a very big role. Yeah, those are the requirements. And when it's all the requirements, yeah, no, sorry. You may have a small set of requirements that are legal, regulatory, contractual obligations, but those things are not requirements at all. And again, just to, you have your, whatever you're shipping, oops, sorry, has to also serve the needs of the business, right? So you may have some requirements that come from the needs of the business. Yeah, sorry, that doesn't fit our brand, it doesn't fit our distribution channel, but the concept of requirements that come from stakeholders, that's something that we need to learn.
Let me reword that. Let's say you specify or you identify needs of a customer.
Yeah.
You eventually want to have an OKR that addresses a larger frame that you are dealing with. But you still have to start with an OKR that is a little more specific to at least the initial customer or customers who are going to adopt it. If they don't, then you have a significant hurdle financially and otherwise in order to meet your final objectives. So are you at that point looking at customers' expectation in terms of outputs, or are you still considering your final objective of additional learning and making into an OKR?
you're always doing the thing that's on the left column. You talk to them, understand their need, but yeah, we want to reduce the customer required system. Want people to be able to use our software without having to call us, we have to call customer service. And then you talk to them, interview them, understand what's causing them, and then you have a hypothesis. You can do line of thinking, understand their needs, rapid prototyping, test ideas, and then you measure if the number goes down. Less people requiring a system. You talk to customers all the time, you listen to them, but they don't give you the solution. You focus on the problems they're having, the pain points, the needs.
Thanks.
So one of the ways to think about it is that there are several techniques, right? Let me go back to the slide from. So modern product teams that using several techniques that many people in Agile have never heard of, right? So just like some people use Agile without DevOps or good engineering practice, they won't be achieve high performance without sound engineering practice and DevOps, things like that. So it's a set of tools, right? You have, yeah, we need Scrum and Kanban, we also need DevOps engineering, we also need modern product management, experimentation. There are different techniques that you need, right? OKR and Output is just one of them, right? So only focusing on Scrum or Kanban won't solve the problem. You also need, and usually the biggest gap we see in Agile teams is that they don't know the modern product management. Okay? That's usually the gap. And again, Marty Kagan, that's the guy to follow, right? That's the person to follow. There's a ton of material, Marty Kagan, you can read. I'm a huge Marty Kagan fanboy. Questions?
I have a question for you, Felipe and Thomaz. Do you have any advice for any kind of organizations that are beginning to basically take on the whole OKR type of mindset? I think one of the precursors to it is to begin measuring. So one of the things is getting used to doing internal measurement in some way, so that you can begin having some sort of metrics. Do you have any particular advice around like how should they conduct that? Where should they begin? Any tips there?
Yeah, sure. The main one is don't wait for the perfect metrics. A common pitfall is people, let's do a 6-month corporate enterprise analytic project to build a data lake, and no, I don't want to have the Agile approach. Start small, learn fast. So OKRs can be imperfect in the beginning. They will be imperfect in the beginning. So take baby steps for better measurement. So start what you have and continuous improvement. That's the biggest advice I have. And I heard from many people over the years that when you learn that OKRs can be imperfect, it can be liberating. Because people are afraid to make mistakes. Right? So they are not going to be imperfect in the beginning. So continuous improvement, right? Start small and improve every quarter. That's the biggest advice. Right?
And just to add on that, it's very common when we engage with our customers that some of the teams are very far from the client, very far from the business. Mm-hmm. And then not an issue. They can start measuring what they can, some DevOps metrics, and then they can connect to another team. They can talk to other people, and it's a journey. Usually it's not the first quarter; it's quarter by quarter, improving that. Mm. And also, we like to say that in every engagement, in our consulting work, like leaders go first. This is the most important sentence first. So they have to be in the training. They have to understand what OKR is about. They have to really understand about metrics so that they can also help the adoption.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, I can see where cases where there needs to be some sort of brainstorming and just like some ideation about how to begin to measure something easily as well. So some of these practices might be.
Yeah, Yeah, just one comment on the chat here. Remember, that outcomes are measurable benefits. So thinking about outcomes requires thinking about measurement. They're one and the same, right? Yeah. You can't think about outcomes without thinking about measurement, right?
Totally, totally. But what I was getting at is that the common reaction of lots of people that are thinking about implementing OKRs is that like, well, we will need to measure. And when you say a word measure, that in the business world, everyone's ready to measure anything that they can. Not because it is valuable or whatever, but it's because like, what can I measure? And it's just like, it's like a raccoon. What can I measure? You know, when we're talking about, it's a different mindset shift to actually thinking in results and outcomes. It's a thinking bigger, not what to measure, but it is thinking bigger. But I absolutely agree with you. The KRs should be measurable. Otherwise, you're not knowing where you're going with them.
Yeah. So again, measurement is important. The thing is, measurement should be measured, not what's easy to measure. And so somebody actually even posted that in the chat. So measure what you should be measuring, not what it's easy to measure, what you are used to measuring. Right? But measurement is key. So you need to think about measurement. Yeah, part of the journey. But again, imperfect measurement, imperfect OKRs, that's usually, and continuous improvement, that usually people feel this liberating and they learn from it. So always developing better results, always develop better metrics, better measurement. It's the way to go.
Other questions from anybody else? And Phil, we'll be happy to type it, to speak it out if you want to just put it in the chat. So.
I have a question. You haven't talked about the business as usual objectives versus the moonshot objectives. How to differentiate the objectives that are, you know, every company needs to achieve, needs to build in a monthly basis, like increasing revenue or increasing their user base, versus the objectives that will actually help the company to give a big next step. You know, how can you help the company to see this difference?
Yeah, the term business as usual is misleading. Because some people say, oh, business usual should be in OKR, so revenue shouldn't be in OKR, which is totally great, doesn't make any sense, right? So the basic idea is an OKR is about what you want to improve. So you have current level performance, you want to increase, have better performance, right? I can share you a couple of articles with how to set how ambitious OKRs can be, OKRs versus KPIs. They're going to help. Okay. And that's a whole 10-minute presentation. So I can share the links. It's probably more effective for everyone. Otherwise, I have to open slides and start again.
Oh, thanks.
But I can just share the links. And I think Michael has a question: how should this focus on outcomes be applied at the team level? Yeah, that's what the whole point of what the whole problem we're trying to solve. Remember, Michael, when we started, so when we began, so let me just go back. So that's the point, right? The point is outcomes all the way down. So the team has an outcome to achieve. And so that's the idea. You build an outcome tree. So the team has an outcome at their level that contributes to a higher level, contributes to a higher level. So everyone has an outcome to achieve. If you're struggling to focus on outcomes, usually it's because you're following the IT model and not the product model. The people just telling you what to build instead of giving you a problem or opportunity. So that's why it's on learning. That's why just applying strictly OKR on top of a traditional company never works. It's a huge shift. Any more questions, everyone?
I assume, I mean, just this question points to where this model is more art than science, where finding the right definition of outcomes based on the level of authority. So when you are lower to the to the bottom here, yeah, the outcomes are defined in more achievable terms and therefore smaller outcomes, versus the higher up in the strategic levels of management, outcomes are, defined bigger and with higher levels of complexity.
The ones that are higher level are broader. The ones in the teams are more specific. They're not necessarily easier to achieve. You can have ambitious OKRs even at the team level, right? And it can be quite common, but they are more specific. Yeah. While the top level ones tend to be high level, broader. Yeah. It's revenue. While the team can be, something very specific. Does it imply that each team has a one-to-one relationship with specific outcome? No, you can also have shared OKRs. You can have a shared OKR where more than one team is working together with the same OKR. You can have more than one team that has to work to achieve the same objective and key results. So not necessarily a one-to-one, because you can have shared.
I have another question for you guys. I think a lot of times when we have talks about this, a lot of times we focus on the negative, like the anti-patterns, how things are broken, how not to do things. From your experience, like what is possible that you have seen where, can you give us a feeling for how often, like in a high-performing organization, how often are they creating OKRs? How often are they changing it? Is there any kind of relationship between, say, how OKRs are used and developed in comparison to like how they do Agile or their sense of maturity or anything like that? Can you give us an idea of like not so much what a academic ideal is, but like what have you seen in the field of like what has been possible in certain companies? You don't have to name them, of course, but can you give us an idea?
First of all, everyone uses Agile, right? Well, we're not saying stop using Scrum or the Kanban, right? They just, where the backlog comes from changes, right? And how we define success and some of the language that we use changes, right? So everybody uses it. People that fail with OKR tend to be people that use Agile in very specific ways, like velocity and points, and we send an auditor to sit in the ceremonies to check if they're doing it, or things like that. So those are usually the ones that are using. I think for the people that use bad Agile, definitely don't succeed with OKR, right? Yeah. So people who, somebody saying, we do set up to use Jira. Yeah, we use Jira. That's the definition. We use Jira. We are Agile. Yeah. So those type of companies, right? They can't even do Agile, right? So they will never do OKR, right? So it's impossible, right? And also companies that struggle with OKR, they often lack some of the basics of Agile. Mm-hmm. They have a very hard time slicing things.
Sure.
Right. So one of the things that we see the most people struggling with is, we have a 12-month project. We don't know how to break it down into a 3-month OKR.
Yeah.
That's because you don't know how to slice things.
Yeah.
Right.
So
you know how to slice things.
Yeah, I get that. But what is a healthy organization that is using this properly when they're doing it right? Right. Like the positive scenario, like what is that, to give people an idea of what good.
Yeah, sure. In the positive scenario is several companies where they test ideas quickly. Teams have autonomy. They have a clear purpose, right? So usually what happens is they have a clear mission. Mm-hmm. So this team works with this type of problem. I don't know. If you're working at companies such as Grubhub, US, or Instacart, whatever you order food, etc. There's a team that deals with bad orders that went bad. Our mission is to make the best experience we can when orders go bad.
Yeah.
So instead of they have a mission
Right.
So it's very common. Not only you have stable teams, but those teams are working on the same problem or opportunity over time. That's something that's very common, right? So that problem or opportunity sometimes it's quarter over quarter. I'm working on the same problem, right?
Right. Right. So I'm hearing a little bit.
Wait 1 second.
Yeah.
Wait 1 second. I'm noticing the time, and I'm noticing that people are fading away. Take a breather, Felipe. Thanks so much. I mean, keep on to your question. I'm going to launch a quick poll, very quick poll, for answering. If you can just answer those 2 questions, and any other recommendations that you might have for the group, you can put in the chat. That would be for us very valuable. And we can continue with Q&A. I just want to get a feedback. This is how we learn as organizers.
Great. Thank you. Yes, please, please participate in the poll. That helps us out greatly. So as you're doing that, I'll just kind of like follow up and kind of like the bottom line, what you just said is sort of, there's a certain sense of where OKRs has permeated into the culture, down to almost at the team level. Like somebody said, like, you know, like how it's almost that the team also comes up with their OKRs as they are developing the solutions. I mean, to kind of put those 2 ideas together, right?
Yeah. So if we go back to the slides here. So the idea is that, let's come back to they together they define their OKRs, right? So let me just, you know, so here they define what are the outcomes they're trying to achieve, who needs to work together to achieve those. Right?
Felipe, you want to share your screen?
Yeah, you have to share your screen again. Yeah.
So starts with the concept of why. Together with leaders, they discuss what the outcome we're trying to achieve. There's back and forth. They collaborate on that, and then it's all turning into how.
Yeah. Yeah, I like this slide. I think that's a simple but yet very important and a lot of complexity there as well. I mean, it does what goes on, but I think it's ultimately, you know, the key message for me. Yeah, thank you.
And it's very interesting. When we introduce OKRs into the teams, we usually see it's very often they don't know the why, and they question, oh, why do our team exist?
Yeah.
Right. And they look for the answer. And it may happen that they reorganize with other teams. They talk to other leaders, and hey, why are you working this product anyway? Right. So it helps to foster this further improvements, you know, ways of working, ways of organizing, structure, everything else.